Good afternoon. This is Gary Jones. You are listening to the UK Genesis podcast, the show that typically showcases web professionals from the UK who use the Genesis framework. This is episode number 17, I think we're at to. My co-host for today is Joe. How you doing, Joe?
Hi, I'm doing well.
Excellent. And we've got an absolutely amazing guest. I'm really excited. I'm really nervous. It's going to be a fantastic show. So my guest today is WordPress co-founding developer Mike Little. Good afternoon, Mike.
Hi. Good afternoon.
How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thank you.
Good. Thank you for taking the time to join us, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in today. If you've got any questions for Mike, which I'm sure you have, and I've already been collecting a whole load of questions already, then put them onto Twitter with the UK Genesis hashtag, and we will see if we can get through them throughout the show. So, I was trying to think of a good introduction for you, Mike, and the only thing I could come up with is kind of, if you consider WordPress to be a computer game, that you're kind of like the Easter egg inside of it, that the people who know about you kind of just think you're amazing, and but there's quite a few people who don't know kind of who you are, or how you fit into the kind of the history of WordPress. So can you kind of give us an introduction about kind of who you are, what you do, and kind of what has brought you here today?
Sure, yeah. I have actually described myself in the past as the evil twin that nobody knows about, as one of the co-founders of WordPress. But yeah, so I'm the co-founder of WordPress. I started it, almost 13 years are we going now, ago with Matt Mullenweg over in the States, and literally kicked off with a comment on a blog post of Matt's because the software we were using, the B2 Cafe Log blogging software, was almost abandoned. The author of that had disappeared off the web, and Matt posted a blog called The Blogging Software Dilemma, and in it he described almost the same route that I'd gone through in terms of looking at blogging software, and kind of said he considered forking it, and I responded, said, yeah, if you're serious about forking, count me in, and in fact, literally, we kicked off at that point. Strangely, only the two of us worked on it up until the first release, and in fact, somebody pointed out to me a couple of years ago that the next comment on that blog post was a year later, celebrating the anniversary. So literally, nobody else commented. But yeah, got involved in that, but then sort of real life took over. But I've always continued with WordPress, and then a few years ago now, almost 7 years ago, I started working for myself as a WordPress consultant, WordPress specialist, and I've been doing that ever since. Is that enough? Is that get across?
Well, I really like the story you told at WordCamp London about the first WordCamp that you went to, and what happened, and what effect that had on you. Do you want to just tell us?
Yeah,
that?
Sure. So yeah, the first WordCamp in Birmingham, WordCamp in UK, which had been organised in Birmingham, and I joined the mailing list. I was, involved in terms of just making suggestions and so on. And got there, and I think it was the first or second speaker of the day, asked for show of hands in the room for people who made some or all of their living from WordPress. And about half the people in that room of 60 or 70 people put their hands up, and I didn't. And I was astonished, and I just really, at that moment, said, why on earth am I not making money out of WordPress, making a living out of WordPress? And literally at that point, I was already to leave the company I was with anyway, with no idea what I was going to do afterwards, and decided that yes, somehow I would start making a living with WordPress. Took a few more months to get going. That was July 2008, and I didn't actually leave my job until December that month, despite the fact that I was only supposed to be working a 3-month notice. But yeah, kicked off my own company in November that year, and quit my job had my last working day in December, and went on from there.
Okay, so looking at the business side, then, what is it that your business does now?
So it's just me, so I'm a one-man company, although I do work with other people when I need to. I've got skills that complement mine. But I do a range of things from building sites for people, although not so much now unless it's a particularly complex site. I do custom plugins. I will build themes as well, but generally from a design. I'm not a designer by any stretch of the imagination. But I also do a lot of training as well, which I'm really enjoying, from sort of classroom-based training, and I run a beginners, an intermediate, and an advanced course, through to developer training. So I've done theme development training, and I've done plugin development training, and I do a lot of one-to-one training as well. And then consultancy as well. It's if somebody decided they want to use WordPress, but for a project, not really necessarily sure how they can work with it and the kind of plugins to use and what custom code needs to be customized, then I can give advice and all that kind of stuff. So just a mixture of stuff, really.
And which of those tasks do you enjoy doing most?
I still enjoy the development the most, although I'm beginning to think that my skills aren't as good as they used to be, because there's some really, really clever stuff being done with WordPress, which is amazing. I'm so pleased that it's come on so well. But I love the training as well, especially the classroom training. I really get it when people's eyes light up and they figure stuff out and they realize just what they can do with WordPress and how far they can go with it. And it's great. One of my courses, the advanced course, there's a bit in there where I talk about custom post types, and go through one of the plugins that allows you to create custom post types without needing any code. And I remember on one occasion, two guys from one of the local universities actually giggling at the back of the class because they were so excited about learning this and how it was going to apply to what they wanted to do. And it's just moments like that really, really make a huge difference.
When you're kind of marketing your training courses, do you put yourself out there as, hey, I'm the co-founder of WordPress, come and learn how to use WordPress or come and develop with WordPress, or is it you kind of keep that in the background and say, well, this is the training, and as a matter of fact, I'll help contribute to some of the early code?
So it's a bit of a mixture. So most of the classroom training that I do for for a local tech place in Manchester's northern quarter called MadLab. And they absolutely do promote it that way, come and learn WordPress from the WordPress co-founder sort of thing. I tend to use it in a pitch. So if I'm pitching directly to somebody, I might say, something along those lines. As the co-founder of WordPress, I'd hope that there's few with as much experience as I have. But yeah, it's not something I particularly push that much. I mean, to me, WordPress is as good as it is because of the people after me. Yeah, in fact, most of my contributions are probably not there anymore. The odd one or two are still spotting the code, but yeah, they've moved on and been reworked and made better. So yeah, there's some really clever people in the community contributing to it. So I tend not to push it that much, but lots of people tell me that I should.
Do you find that having that title, which obviously you'll have forevermore now, is kind of a benefit or a burden, not just for your training courses and your marketing, but kind of in the wider, not quite personal life, but kind of a wider scenario as well?
I think on the business side it can be a benefit. On the personal side, I don't think it has any effect at all. I think most people that I know that aren't in the tech industry don't even know what WordPress is. My other half's seriously unimpressed. So yeah, it doesn't really affect me on that side of things. But yeah, I've never particularly seen it as a burden, other than people make an assumption that I must have something to do with WordPress.com, or that WordPress is WordPress.com, and that I'm probably a multimillionaire. So apart from getting that wrong, and that's some journalists as well have done that, otherwise, yeah, it doesn't seem to be anything that I would describe as a burden.
Do you, and it's going to be one of my later questions that Joe said, oh, I'm not going to ask him that, but we're on the point anyway. You mentioned kind of money there. Do you sometimes consider kind of what if? I mean, you've seen where kind of Matt Mullenweg has taken WordPress and his status and his wealth and his kind of everything that he's been up to. Do you can make comparisons sometimes and say, well, that could have been me, or no, I don't want that?
I'd say no, not really. I mean, yeah, kind of. It would have been nice, but not really. No, it's. I've never been a particularly. I'm actually. I would describe myself as a poor businessman, to be honest. I love the techie side of things, and I've never been particularly interested. I wasn't particularly interested in running my own company. It's probably why it took me so long to actually get around to it. But no, I don't. Certainly don't envy Matt. He's worked really hard, and he runs a great company. I mean, you only have to look at some of the things that go on there, the way he's built the company, and in particular, you know, the coverage he's getting, or the company's getting, Automatica getting for remote work and things like that. It's clear that yeah, he's doing a good job, and I think. Sometimes people forget that whilst Matt might be remembered for his saxophone, he was Sax Matt on the original B2 forums and learning jazz at university. I don't think that was his major. His major was economics and politics, so he was always going to be a businessman of some description. And I think that shows. I think that training that he did, that learning shows, and the way he's approached building up his company.
Yep.
So one of the most popular questions that people have asked is if you were going to fork B2 again right now, if you could tell your younger self, what would you have done differently?
I think cleaning up the code earlier in terms of the architecture, in terms of the structure. I mean, Michel Valdrigi, who originally wrote the code, he was learning B2. Sorry, he was learning PHP when he was writing B2. So WordPress has a legacy of some badly structured code. I won't say poorly written code because the code's been worked over so many times anyway. I don't think there's poorly written code in there, but there's certainly badly architected code, badly structured code, and I think, you know, it would have been good to perhaps concentrate on improving that earlier on in the process. And there's some great leaps been made now, but I think it may have made it a little bit more respectable amongst the professional developers world, because I think for many years WordPress was a bit of a joke to people who perhaps developed in Drupal, other languages besides PHP. I mean, I went from Java to PHP, and you know, I did Java, J2EE, all the you know, enterprise level stuff, and still found value in programming in PHP in a system like WordPress.
Where do you stand on the current minimum version of PHP for WordPress being 5.2? Do you agree with the arguments about the backward compatibility, or do you think we need to move forward for kind of developer benefit? Where do you stand on that?
So I agree with holding off until the minimal effect. I mean, the thing is, I can't remember off the top of my head what the figures are now, but if we say, you know, 10% are still on a ridiculously old or on that minimum version, that's a huge number of websites. That's millions of websites that potentially would break, and I understand now that WordPress is so huge that you just can't make those sweeping decisions, particularly as its largest audience is, you know, by far is a non-technical audience. It's a different world from, say, Drupal, who seem to change everything every release and break all the old stuff. But you know, people who use Drupal are technical people who've built sites, you know, and so I think WordPress is different in that way. But yeah, I really wish the hosts would catch up. It's more an issue with the host catching up. But you know, WordPress is ready for, you know, many of the new features, and in fact can use many of the new features, doing, you know, dynamic version testing and checking for capability, and it will work in a more modern way on a more modern version of PHP. So and also have to say that's really impressive, the way that some of that's been coded, because I wouldn't have known how to do that.
How do we address that problem then? Whose responsibility is it to kind of push these hosts on?
It's I think it's people who use those hosts for sure. They, if they understand that they need to move on and understand that a particular host might be, holding that back, then make the requests on support, see if it can be done, and make your choice known with your wallet if you need to, and move on to any of the tens of thousands of other hosts who are more up to date. Yeah, it's a tricky thing, but I think it has to be. At the end of the day, I think it has to be the customers of those hosting companies that make their thoughts known, whether that's by bugging them till they fix it or moving away to somebody else. I know Automatic do try and establish relationships with the hosting companies, and that has been successful, but only with the bigger ones that have that ability to move. I think the smaller ones, it's not so much the ability, it's the will to do it, and whether they can be bothered rebuilding their servers.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think, kind of a question from Angie Vale, why do you think WordPress is one of the most, or is the most popular CMS?
I used to say because it's easy to use, but now I do beginners training in WordPress. It's actually not easy to use until you know how to use it, and then it's easy to use. But compared to some systems, it is a low barrier to entry. But also, the community around it is very good and very supportive, and in fact, all the themes, all the plugins, everything around it that helps make it better it just seems to be so much bigger than all the others, and it's a kind of chicken and egg thing. But we're now in that situation where it is a big community, it is a big set of plugins, a huge variety of themes, and it just gives people the choice. But a few other things, I think it's stayed relatively simple. At its core, it still satisfies that personal publishing platform that it started as. You don't have to add a ton of plugins to just make your voice heard on the web, and I think that is still one of its most powerful things.
And how do you think it might change in the next kind of 5 years, 5-10 years?
Oh, that's a good question. And I have to say, I don't really know. I was asked that probably 5 years ago, and what I thought was completely wrong. Although I still think there's an element of that going to come along. Actually, yeah, it's happened a little tiny bit. And the thing that I mentioned a few years ago, as I thought would be one of the futures of WordPress, was vertical versions of WordPress. So WordPress bundled with a whole bunch of themes that satisfied particular niche plugins to support that. The one that I thought I saw it happening with was churches. There seemed to be a few different people creating church-related almost packages of WordPress with a nice theme and a few plugins that were are almost install and go. And I thought there'd be a lot more of that. I think that hasn't really happened. However, people have done a similar thing as with the software as a service type model. So your Happy Tables and those kind of platforms are almost doing that. They've effectively made WordPress into a vertical platform just for their particular audiences.
Have you seen Rainmaker, where it's WordPress, it's Genesis, and it's the other copy blogger products all in together? So that's something like that. A question that Jackie's just asked. She was sort of saying, what about us forking a version of WordPress for an enterprise client, so we can get rid of some of that having to keep that backward compatibility and just have an enterprise version? And would that serve larger businesses better, do you think?
I don't think so. I think maybe that could have, with enough backing behind it, but I actually don't think that's necessarily the case. One of the interesting things about the architecture of WordPress is that WordPress uses its own hook system. So in fact, you can, even in a Sunrise script or in an early Mu plugin, for example, turn off most of WordPress functionality and not have to worry about any of the legacy code, all these old wrapper functions and things like that, you can actually really turn off a huge amount of the thing that WordPress does, and yet still take advantage of the things that it gives you out of the box, and the things that make it, for me, a great starting place for any kind of pretty much any kind of application. So the authentication, the user management, the basic content management, I think makes it. I think it is already an ideal platform for more enterprise level solutions. Yes, you have to be cleverer, and you certainly don't want to just throw in a load of off-the-shelf plugins. But yeah, and some enterprises are doing some very clever things with WordPress.
Related question from Dave Dean, one of our former guests as well, says, do you think that kind of WordPress core or kind of the WordPress community could do anything specific for enterprise level solutions?
I don't think there's a will for a start. Certainly, I don't believe that Matt has a will to do that. He still wants it always to be that personal publishing platform. And I think that, if anything, what could be done is sharing the knowledge of how to effectively start with WordPress, but then quickly and easily throw away the things that you don't need. So understand what all the bits are, and then, how to turn off the things that you don't need. Maybe even examples of how to replace the things that an enterprise solution might want to replace, and more knowledge. I think the Codex has seriously outlived its lifetime, and the replacement is still not the right replacement, I don't think.
In what way?
I think the same reason that the Codex isn't good is that, or most of it isn't good, is that it's a reference. And the problem with references are that they're great if you know what you're looking for and know what you need to look for, then you can look for it and find out. If you don't know what you need to look for, you're lost. Now, there's some really good getting started tutorials on the Codex, but at the developer level, it's reference, and it's like those 700-page books we used to buy before we had ebook readers, or that used to even ship with software. They are references of every single nook and cranny, but they don't tell you how to use the system or how to build on the system, and I think that's what's missing.
Do you think that the WP REST API will be a significant improvement or benefit to the moving forwards?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm really excited about it. I keep trying to play with it with my own projects. I'd love to get a client project that allowed me to have good play with it, although one that I'm starting to work on, we might use the WP API for it. But yeah, it's the future of WordPress. It will make WordPress into a literally just a starting block. And yeah, I think all the super new, constantly changing, faster than WordPress itself, things that are coming along for especially the JavaScript-based things that allow you to do very clever things on the front end, can all make use of that API. I just think it's absolutely the future. Yeah, really excited by the possibilities. Definitely.
Do you think? Question from Claire. Do you think there's any plugins that should be incorporated into Core?
No, bizarrely. I actually agree wholeheartedly with keeping Core as simple as possible, because it's not even an 80-20 rule. It's so big that it's a 90-10 or a 95-5 rule. Is that whatever you can think of to incorporate into Core, that's a plugin that's more complicated than perhaps a limit login attempts, or I remember when tags was a separate plugin, then it's the majority of people won't need it, and I think the system we've got now, where you've always got a choice of how to implement something, even if you're not a developer, because there's always 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 plugins that will do that, I think is absolutely the best way to go.
In that case, then, is there anything in core that you think should just be a plugin?
Well, although they're still there, nobody sees them anymore. But the links, which was one of my add-ons, is still in there. And somebody, I thought I should do it as well, but never got around to it, should just make it a plugin and get rid of them. And that would save a table and save a chunk of code, and just move that into as a separate plugin. But the key thing that they need to do, and I think this is sometimes one of the hardest things when you change existing systems that have a huge user base, is that you need to manage the upgrade in a sensible way. So people are still using, for example, that links functionality, and I know some people use it hugely, because if you put the work in, it's quite a good system. You can't possibly break everything for them, so it has to be, if it's a plugin, it has to do the right thing and either turn them into custom post types or something else. What else might be ripped out of WordPress? Don't know. It's not too bad. I quite like it, and I like the fact that they're now starting to take things out that are being replaced by the customizer.
That was pretty much my next question. Is what do you think of the customizer?
I kind of like it. It's been a little bit awkward because I saw it appear and it seemed to be yeah, and then almost before within 2 or 3 releases, it seemed to do an awful lot more. And I saw a figure a while ago about the number of themes on the repository that were compatible, and I realized that actually I had to change all my course around setting things up and to point people at the customizer. So I think it's a good thing. I think it's got a few more iterations yet to be to make it better, but it does worry me that it relies almost completely, as far as I can see, or if we're not careful, it'll end up that way, on JavaScript, and that always is a potential for excluding people and stopping people being able to use things. If it can be constructed the right way, and there's no reason it can't be, so that if you take away the JavaScript, it still works, with forms and clicks and links and horrible and slow and page refreshes, but has that fallback, if you like, then I'd be more pleased. But yeah, I think it's a great thing, and it's certainly, I tell people in my beginners class, it saves you having to go through 3, 4, 5, 6 different admin screens to set your site up, and it also allows you to get it all done in one go, rather than having your site in this half-finished state where you're making these changes piecemeal. So yeah, I think it's great.
Moving kind of forwards then is a couple of questions from Devinder and Paul related to kind of what are your thoughts on page builders in terms of using for plugin and theme page builders.
So my biggest issue with them is the ones that are built into themes basically lock you into that theme, and that's just not a good thing. The same with any themes that lock you in. Whatever for features a theme implements that should be plugin territory, I think is a bad thing. And then the fact that most of them still work as shortcodes, I think is just a bad thing. There's a couple that I believe are now getting better. One that I know for sure is the Beaver Builder one, which if you disable the plugin, so it's a plugin base, so it works with any theme. If you disable the plugin, all the content you've generated on that front end with the page builder is actually in your pages. It's not styled properly, but you've not lost that content, and that's the key thing, is that if you turn off your plugin or you change your theme, all the work that you've done to build those pages on the front end is lost, unless it's a really, really good tool, and most of them don't seem to be. At worst, or almost so for some of them at best, you're left with a page full of square brackets that makes almost no sense, apart from you might just be able to spot some of the paragraphs.
Yep. Obviously, we are the UK Genesis podcast. If anybody's got any questions, then get them in on Twitter using the UK Genesis hashtag. Speaking of which, then, what do you think of Genesis? Why do you use Genesis? What do you like about it, dislike about it?
One of the things that I really like about it is that pretty much all the themes, and certainly the last 20 or so themes, are all really nice out the box. And as a non-designer, it means that I don't have to do lots of work to tweak them and make them look how perhaps a client might want. I also like the fact that they are customizable with code. So although the themes that you use are child themes, I tend in a number of cases to not actually modify that child theme, so I can take the updates, and I actually tend to write a companion plugin that will make the modifications to it where appropriate. And in fact, there's not a huge amount that you can't do with code and with plugins to change the behavior of the themes. And so yeah, pretty much most Genesis themes that I work with or work on, I very rarely modify the child theme, the original child theme.
Obviously, one of the most recent updates was the 2.2 set of releases, which focused on accessibility for Genesis.
Yeah.
Is accessibility on the front end something that you take a keen interest on for your client projects, or within your training, your developer training, or is it something that it's there and?
It's so accessibility is something that I'm very, very passionate about. So I'm really pleased that those moves have been made to improve accessibility in WordPress itself as well as in Genesis. Yeah, it goes back to that thing about potentially excluding people. I mean, for those who were at WordCamp London, one of the questions, it wasn't on the video unfortunately, but one of the questions somebody asked was about accessibility. Whilst WordPress is great for empowering people to have their voice on the web, all over the world, in oppressed countries, in rural Africa, all kinds of places where people are able to use WordPress to have their voice. If somebody who lives in your street who can't use a keyboard or who can't see a screen is unable to use WordPress, that would be a terrible, terrible thing. And so accessibility for me is absolutely huge. You can't exclude people for technical reasons. So yeah, any progress in accessibility I'm really, really pleased about, and it's great that Genesis is catching up, but equally great is that WordPress core itself is catching up, and that in fact it's officially an important part of all development should be that things get looked at and looked over by the accessibility team, that team of volunteers who do a great job of keeping people on the toes.
Absolutely, yeah, and there's certainly a few within the WordPress accessibility team who are within the Genesis community as well, and so we kind of get that two-way benefit as well.
Yeah.
Do you use kind of Genesis for kind of the majority, say, of your client projects, or do you prefer kind of standalone themes rather than child-parent themes?
When I am building sites, and as I say, I don't do that as much. I do tend to use it as much because I think people stick with themes they're familiar with. But yeah, I do tend to use it. And any test sites or experiments that I throw at myself, I will tend to just throw a Genesis theme on there and do minimal changes to it because it's already a good-looking theme. And I'm somebody who appreciates the simpler side of design, so I like lots of white space, nice looking fonts, things that are clear and readable. I know the designers will hate me, but after that initial impression, whether it's wow or otherwise, it's all about the content and how easy the site is to use and how useful the site is to you. So yeah, I don't, apart from that initial wow, first impressions and all that, I don't have great things to say about design generally. That's not to say it's not good, but yeah.
What's the biggest site that you've worked on, or the most prestigious client, or that you've done?
In terms of probably most prestigious, my very first client after quitting my day job was the number 10 Downing Street site, so the website for the Office of the Prime Minister. So that was quite interesting as your first job.
Baptism of fire.
Yeah, and that was originally maintenance, so that it was built by a design company who really didn't know WordPress, and I was kind of brought in to fix lots of bugs. But then I developed features for it and so on, and at one point rebuilt it and rebuilt their infrastructure as well, which was quite good fun. Then they took it back in-house, and then eventually they took it off WordPress and used the new system that GDS had built. Probably the most complex or biggest one is, excuse me, one that's an ongoing project, been going since 2010, so over 5 years now, and that's the I'm a Scientist, Get Me Out of Here site that I built for my client Gallimana, and that's a science engagement site. So basically, in school science lessons, kids come onto the site. It runs as a 2-week event. Kids come onto the site. There's a whole bunch of scientists have signed up to the site. They put their profiles on there, and then the kids get to ask them questions, anything at all, which is really, really good. And then they also do live chats after the first week, or maybe they do live chats in the first. No, yeah, they do live chats from the beginning. So they get to chat real time, and then after the first week, they get to vote for their favorite scientists, and one a day gets kicked off the site, off the event, and the eventual winner wins £500 to promote science in whatever way they want, and it's absolutely brilliant. It's been and still is an honor and a privilege to work on it. I love what it's doing for science engagement. I love what it's doing for kids' attitudes for science, and it's also just incredibly complex. I think we're up to about 16 custom plugins now. The custom theme, or rather the custom theme, and its 9, 10, maybe 12 child themes are huge and horrendously complex. But it's an incredibly functional site. I should probably write a book about it. There's so much on that site and so much it does. And I had a conversation with a client yesterday about lots of exciting new things that we're going to be adding to it. It's been really huge, and it's gone all over the world as well. We've done it in Malaysia, Australia, the US. I think it's coming in Spain next year, which is going to be interesting because we need to make sure that everything's translatable.
I was going to ask you, so that so translation, can't speak now. Translation ready and all of that sort of side of it. It's got to be
it pretty much is. And if you ever need to work out whether something's translation ready or not, the Pig Latin plugin is awesome for that. It's really good. But yeah, I think it is. What's really interesting is that I already use the translation facility for the application itself. So the original application is I'm a Scientist, Get Me Out of Here. But we also have run I'm an Engineer, Get Me Out of Here, and just started either this week or last week, I'm an Astronaut, Get Me Out of Here. And those are implemented using language translations.
Yeah. Oh,
so
wow.
that the wording and the functionality of the site and the look of the site changes using child themes and different pretend languages. So we have an engineering language and we have an astronaut language.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, that's going to be interesting to then actually mix that in with a real other language.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Jackie's asked, how can we make how to make a website more accessible be simplified for people who are learning to develop websites?
Mm-hmm.
Because I've looked at that documentation and it's like, whoa. So have you got any tips?
I think start with the basics. Too many people start with looking for a theme with as many bells and whistles as they can find, and I think that's the wrong approach. So for example, with my courses, I start with just all the built-in WordPress functionality and just show people just how far you can go with that, with custom menus, with widgets, with perhaps a couple of additional plugins. You can actually go quite far in terms of building a site with its functionality, laying out its architecture, the navigation, splitting up your content in ways that make sense to you and your client, or your visitors, I should say, all without having to even think about getting into coding, or even the more complex plugins. So I think build things up, and again, I try and emphasize that it's about content. It's no good having the best looking site in the world if you actually haven't got round to putting any content beyond your about page and the hello world post, but some great looking sliders. So yeah, to me it's get started with the content first, build your architecture, build your interaction in there, whether that's comments or contact forms and all that kind of stuff, and then start adding the functionality that you need and adding the complexity. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Take it one bit at a time. That's kind of the approach that I've taken so far with the improvements in Genesis. Is basically reading everything about that and how that's implemented, and making sure that all new sites now are using that. And it's a case of once I've got that under my belt, be looking at what else is there that we need to consider and so on.
Yes. Yeah.
So Angie asks, are you surprised by the demand for WordPress business consultancy services, that developers, just how successfully they can sell their services?
Not really surprised by it. Not now, anyway. I mean, I was surprised by the whole thing around just how much business, how the business had developed around WordPress. I really actually missed out on that key area of growth when companies like StudioPress and Woo and people like that got started and grew big, and the agencies and so on. So that was surprising, really, when the first big survey that Matt ran came out. So that was a big surprise. But now I'm not surprised, because it's such a popular tool, but the majority of people who need to use or want to use WordPress are not technical, and so they need someone to help them out, and they can struggle along, and manage a few bits, and there's some good and some bad videos on YouTube to help you out with things. But I think the problem is that, as I mentioned earlier on, it's only easy to use once you've learned how to use it. And that learning how to use it can be quite hard. And there's so much that's not discoverable. That's one of the things I think that WordPress can improve in, is making it discoverable, or making the functions and the functionality that's built in discoverable. Here's an interesting thought that's just occurred to me now as I said that. So one of the things that annoyed me with 2015, besides the fact that I had to change my courses, was that it doesn't have the automatic menu anymore. And I used to tell people at the beginning of my course, you just add a page and it automatically appears on the menu, and if you don't need to go further than adding 5 or 6 pages and then doing a blog or news or whatever, your site's built and you don't need to do anything. But actually, by not having the automatic menu, you now have to discover about custom menus, and therefore you now know you've got that flexibility to do whatever you want in terms of navigation and things like that. So maybe that's a good thing that I've been complaining about for several months.
It's funny you should say that. I was literally just building a site for someone, and she added some new categories, and she wrote to me and it's saying, I've added new categories and they're not showing on the menu. Why are they not there? And it's like, well, because you have to add them to the menu. But it's, so people do they assume, some more non-technical people just assume that it will automatically add. But
yes, yeah.
Then again, sometimes you don't want it to automatically add.
That's right. Yeah, it is difficult. Yeah.
It's difficult. Yeah. Do you think that the power of WordPress, the reason why it is so popular, is because it's down to the introduction of plugins and themes? And were you involved in that decision? Because that must have been an early on decision.
So absolutely, that's where huge amount of WordPress power comes from is that you don't have to modify the original. You don't, and these days you don't have to get involved in any kind of coding or anything to add huge amounts of functionality. And that is really, really huge, and there's not many systems out there that are like that. I wasn't specifically, no, in fact, no, I wasn't directly involved in adding that functionality in there. Although interestingly, filters already existed in B2, which I didn't know at the time. But yeah, filters already existed in B2 before we forked it and created WordPress. And in fact, the actions that perhaps is the key things for WordPress, sorry, for plugins, are under the hood treated the same as filters, without returns. Although I wish they did return as well. So yeah, it's I wasn't directly involved in it. It's actually no different than things I've written a dozen times before in different languages in different organizations that I work for. At the end of the day, for those of technical mind, they're just callbacks. You register callbacks, and the system calls you back at the appropriate time. And in other languages, that's exactly what they are. But it's actually done in a really clever way. It's done in a particularly flexible way. And again, that's the type of thing that I love doing, is that make things configurable by name. So you've got that wonderful thing that if you hook onto a whole bunch of actions and those actions don't get called, nothing breaks. And it's just a great way to mean that you can tinker about with code, and if somebody turns off a plugin or a plugin gets disabled for whatever reason, stuff doesn't break if you're using actions and filters and things like that. But yeah, that ability to effectively modify pretty much anything and everything that WordPress does in lots of different ways is the reason it's so great. It really is.
And I think it's the presence of all the action hooks and filters and everything in Genesis, which is one of the main reasons why I know a lot of people love Genesis, because it gives them that flexibility as well.
Absolutely, without necessarily, having to hack into all the individual code files and make those changes directly in a dozen different templates that you might have had to do in a standard theme. Just hook onto the one action, and you're good to go.
One question we ask most people who come on this show is the reason behind their name of their business, and it's Z1.com. Why is it Z1.com?
So my very first domain that I bought was ampersoft.co.uk, because I used to have, when I was young, an obsession with ampersands. I thought they were great, they looked great, and I thought the name was brilliant. And at one point I decided I was going to have lots of different companies all were based on that, and I had Ampersoft, Ampersound, because I was always been into music, and various different plays on the word I could come up with. And so that was my first domain, and then I kind of realized that it's rather long and nobody knows how to spell it. And I thought, in 1999 this would be, I think. I thought I need a short name and a .com. And already pretty much all the 3- and 4-letter names were already gone. And so I went with Z1 as being, whilst it's a .com, it's kind of English with it being Z. And in fact, for a long time, many years, there was just a holding page on that domain that said Z1.com. The Americans call it Z, but we call it Z or something like that. And that, it was literally just, I wanted to buy a short domain name. Nothing more than that.
How do you feel about all the new top-level domain names coming out? Have you thought about trying to grab something that's nice and punchy? One of the new top-level ones.
I've got a few of the newer ones that have come out, but actually some of the more obscure ones are quite good fun as well. So I now do have a 4-letter domain, so wp.tl is one of my domains, which I then had to make up something that it stood for. So now it stands for WordPress Training Lab. But that was quite nice to get that. But the new ones, whilst I've got a few of them, some around the training, and they are absolutely about making money, unfortunately. whilst yet we really were running out of extension of names that people could use that was short and snappy and findable. Adding however many hundreds and hundreds, is it thousands we're getting up to, top level domains didn't make any sense. Maybe adding 10 or 20 would have made sense, but yeah, most of it's just about money, and especially from the big corporates who have now got to buy, I don't know, what, 50, 80, 100, 200 domains in their trademark name.
Exactly that. I have a lot of clients who sort of say, "Oh, should I also get this version?" And then if they say, "Oh, should I get the hyphenated version?" and I say, "Well, look, you got to stop because, you know, otherwise, unless you've got lots of money to throw at this."
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to when .web comes out because my business name is Kalia Web, and one of the reasons it's called Kalia Web is I wanted a short name, and I'm looking forward to being able to have Kalia.web, and I've said that live now because you know, someone might go and try and get that for me, but you know, so I don't.
Yeah, it's you still want something that's short and snappy, that's memorable. I'd love to get MikeLittle.com. But although I was going to say, unfortunately, that's somebody's had that for a while. There's a realtor in the US, but actually the site has been down for 6 months or more now.
So you're monitoring it.
So yeah, it'd be nice to get a hold of it. I have many variations on Mike Little, I have to say, and you know, renewal time comes around. I think I'm not using this. Should I spend this again? But most of the time I do.
Yeah. How many domains do you own, do you think?
Oh, 40, 50 maybe.
Oh, good.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, I know people who have hundreds and hundreds. I mean, I actually manage a lot more because I often manage domains for clients, especially the DNS side of things, because it's just, again, it's something that's complex and people don't necessarily know how to do. That technical side of things, and there's actually quite a bit more than just pointing your domain at your website that you need to do with DNS that many don't.
Yeah. We noticed on your website you're using HTTPS. Do you think it's essential for all websites to start using that?
I don't think it's yet essential. The first one I did purely to see if I could actually set it up, especially as I'm using Nginx. I haven't used Apache for a while, so setting up HTTPS on Nginx was a mysterious thing to me, especially on a shared server. So I have a dedicated server with multiple sites on it, but I managed to get that working, and then managed to tweak it for the bits where it didn't work. Luckily, I actually realized it wasn't working on my phone fairly early on, because believe it or not, the Chrome browser on a Android is a little bit stricter than the one on your desktop. So that's what I started with, but around the same time, Google started saying, you know, that they would, all other things being equal, which is a phrase I use all the time when I'm talking about SEO, they say that, you know, having a secure site is a little bit of a, or potentially can be a little bit of a boost, all other things being equal. And I think these days the technology behind website hosting means that it's not the performance hit that it used to be, and it did. It used to be absolutely, you know, you could be looking at 10 and 15% slowdown by running your site over SSL or LTS, whatever it's called now. But yeah, these days I'm going to be doing it more and more. I think we've got 5 sites now that are running secure, and I will probably do more.
Just before we talk about kind of your workflow and kind of the tools that you use kind of internally to do that, just one thing I want to kind of touch on. Obviously, recently we had Alex King who passed away due to cancer. Very unfortunate. At the start of the year, we had Kim Parcell, who was one of the major contributors to the Docs team.
Yeah.
Had you had any involvement kind of with those folks, and do you think kind of the WordPress community is established enough now that kind of we're unfortunately going to see kind of more of these key personnel kind of leaving us, and how do you suggest we kind of best remember their contributions to the community?
So Kim, I didn't have any contact with, and in fact, although I'd seen a name about, didn't really know much about her until, unfortunate, she did die. Alex, yeah, I remember chatting with Alex on the B2 forums before even WordPress started, and in being involved in the early days, running the theme competition. I even entered his second theme competition that that he ran. Yeah, it's I think yeah, I mean it's not so much about age, because Alex wasn't any great age. It can happen. I remember. Who's the chap Dunbar with the eye patch? He was critically
Dunbar.
ill. He had an accident. Anybody can go at any time. I think it's great that we're a huge community, and probably more than in some other areas, the fact that everything we do is open. It's open source. All the forums are there and searchable. The codex and all those things. So we won't necessarily lose people's contributions. But also what you touched on about, how do we remember them? I think the fact that we've done, one of the things that Alex asked, which was about, your thoughts or your memories of him. We publish what we can. We publish information about people, and because most of us manage and own our own sites, those things will stay up as long as we want to. On a more, an even more somber note, it's actually something we all need to think about. One, from a business point of view, what will happen to our business if something happens to us? But also, what kind of legacy of control do we need to leave for our online properties? I mean, I know there's already been issues with Facebook accounts for people that have died, where spouses or parents haven't been able to get access to the accounts, whether that's to close it down or to turn it into a memorial account or something like that. It's actually a huge question that these online presences are something that we've never had to think about or deal with before. That's actually something we need to think about.
Thank you for that. Okay, changing tack completely now. What tools do you use for creating invoices, organising training with clients, or project management? How time tracking? What sort of tools do you use for any of those?
So all kinds of stuff. So at the moment, for accounting, I use Cashflow with a K, which I've used since its early days. Although now it's been bought by a big company. I use Receipt Bank, which is awesome. It's absolutely saved me many, many hours. I actually originally got the option where I could put all my receipts in an envelope and send it off to them for free, and they would just enter them into the system, which then ties to Cashflow. But now I either take photos of stuff with my camera, with the little app on the camera, or PDFs and even emails. I just print them as PDFs and drop them in a specific Dropbox folder, and they put them in my accounts for me. I love it. It saves me so much time. Other things that I use, project management, I tend to use Basecamp. I have a Trello account and have had a play with it, but Basecamp is the one that I've kind of stuck with for quite a long time. In particular, Gallimana, the I'm a Scientist project, so the client behind that, they use Basecamp hugely, and they've massive set of projects on Basecamp because, as I say, everything's still ongoing. Other tools, I love Zapier. So I use Zapier to tie bits and bats of things together, which is quite nice. And that's everything, for example, so from when somebody fills in a contact form on my site, it also adds them to my CRM, as well as sending me an email. One of the things I do with my training customers is give them access to a private support forum for after the 2 days of lessons are finished, and that's just it's actually a Gravity form, and it does it registers them on the site, it adds them to the right forum, it adds them to a CRM, and it adds them to my MailChimp mailing list as well. Some bits are done with Zapier, other bits are done directly. So yeah, those kind of tools that I use. I use Toggle for time tracking, no E. I thought we'd just given up dropping vowels from names, but apparently not. What else do I use?
What do you use for your to-do list?
Oh, Todoist. No, Toodle. Oh no. I did use Todoist. ToodleDo is the one that I use at the moment, but there's got to be number 6 or 7 in the series. They all seem to work for a while, and then I get fed up with them, or something's not happy, or occasionally something more shiny comes along, which in the case of Todoist didn't last long. Yes, it was shiny, but I didn't like it. So yeah, ToodleDo I'm using at the moment. I've got some automation with that as well. So I've got a couple of forums that I watch for new software releases. For example, new version of a piece of software comes out, then it ends up creating a to-do with Zapier on my to-do list. So things like that are quite good.
Do you think that there's an immense amount of value in automating things like that to run your business efficiently?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, just everything. So, for example, I use Freshdesk for support, so client support. So when a client raises a ticket on Freshdesk, it gets added as a task in my time tracker in Toggle, so that then I just need to type the ticket number in and know what item I'm tracking for my time. Similarly, I create a new project in Basecamp, it gets added into Toggle, and so on. And yeah, tying those things together, for me, it's like the assistant I don't have or I can't afford to pay, doing all those little regular things that I keep forgetting about that should be written on pieces of paper somewhere. But yeah, getting at a computer to do with.
Do you track your time? Do you kind of charge hourly, or is it to track your time to see how you can make your business more efficient? Do you
mixture of both, really? So some jobs I charge hourly, so I will track my time for those. Others where I might be doing something that's a fixed fee, then I'll still track my time to make sure that I'm not doing too much. I also, just track my own tasks, just again to look at efficiency and look at just how much time I'm spending on things. I started using one of the ones that will monitor what websites you visit and what apps you use and things like that.
Rescue Time?
Yeah, Rescue Time. So I started using Rescue Time because I thought it would be great to tell me stop using social media and all the rest of it. And then I discovered, well, 2 things. 1, I actually don't use social media that much. And 2, I was doing 50, 60 and 70-hour weeks. And actually it helped me stop doing that. So that was quite useful, not for the reason I thought it was going to be.
Do you? I think we mentioned on the kind of pre-show notes. Obviously, you live with your family. There is having a nice work-life balance kind of critical to everybody's well-being.
I think it is. Yeah, I think it absolutely is. Although I'm not very good at it still. I still tend to work about 8 or 9 hours. And then still do a bit in the evening, but yeah, it definitely makes a difference, and it's as much the balance in terms of time, but also the separation as well. I've now got an office at the back of my house, which is actually a physically separate building, and that's made a huge difference in terms of not being disturbed, not being tempted to wander off into the kitchen and grab a snack and this, that, and the other. It makes a huge difference. It can be isolating as well, but in terms of getting more work done, that's made a difference. And that then makes it easier to walk away from that office and lock the door, and then I'm done working, mostly.
In terms of trying to avoid the isolation there, what involvement do you have with kind of the local, not necessarily Stockport, but say the Manchester WordPress community?
So I actually run the Manchester WordPress user group, which I've been doing for 6 years now, I think, or 5 years. and that's great. That's monthly meetup, and that's pretty huge. We have, I think, about 500 on our meetup group. We regularly get 30-40 people, and that's quite interesting. That's grown really well. I can definitely say I'm friends with quite a few people I've met through that. I also try to be involved in various other things. We've got WordCamp Manchester coming up this weekend, which actually I haven't been involved with the organisation, but I was last year. I sort of spearheaded that last year. This year I've kind of just stayed to one side as a mentor. Yeah, there's that, and then as I say, I do work for MadLab in terms of running training courses there, and that's a brilliant space for lots of techie groups and creative groups and so on. And I'm also actually on the board of advisors for MadLab as well, so that's quite useful. And then there's a couple of workspaces in Manchester that I occasionally visit. There's an interesting one called Zyferblatt, which is you pay for your time and everything in there's free, coffee and biscuits and cakes and stuff. You just pay by the minute, which is quite interesting. And then Spaceport X, which used to have a different name that I can't remember. They have very kindly given me a hot desk in there that I can use if there's space available at any time. So I do tend to try and at least head up to Manchester every couple of weeks and spend an afternoon there or a full day there. So that helps, absolutely.
Do you get to many WordCamps throughout the year? You plan to go to WordCamp US?
I've not been to any that were outside the UK, actually. And I always have plans to do more, but never get around to it. In fact, I've still got, just in front of me, I can see it now, is my expired passport that I just need to renew and sort out.
Just in time for Vienna, at least.
Okay, you're going to come to Vienna.
It would be great. I'd love to sort it out. Hopefully I can and get myself in gear and not have too much work on. But I do try and get to the UK ones. Unfortunately, I was actually supposed to speak at London or manage a panel, I think, at the last London one. And unfortunately, the last minute problem meant that I couldn't go. But yeah, I've done a few. I've done Sheffield and all the WP UK organised ones. Been involved with those. So yeah.
Cool. Okay, we have gone past our usual time, but Mike has said he'd graciously go a bit longer, as we've got still quite a few questions that we can kind of ask of him. So if you've got any more questions, send them in on Twitter. Let's see how we're doing. Yeah, we've got 1 or 2 extra questions coming in there with the UK Genesis hashtag, so we see them and we'll try and get them asked. Joe, did you want to do the quick fire round?
I was just about to say that. Should we do the quick fire round?
The quick fire round is a nice chance just to
come in. Right. So, you ready?
Yeah.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, I had no idea. Literally had no idea. And in 5th year at secondary school, excuse me, we had a bunch of career advisors come in, and my career advice was, what are you interested in? I said, well, a few years ago I got an electronics set for Christmas and that was really good. Oh, you should be an artificer in the Royal Navy. And that was it. That was just mate, I didn't even know what that was. And the reality was, the school that I went to, everybody was actually expected to go on to university and not have to worry about careers. But it's not something I ever thought of at all. Strangely.
Do you use a Mac or a PC?
I now use a Mac. I'm 3 years into my Mac now. I'm on my second one because the first one broke after 2 years, which I'm really unhappy about. Prior to that, I used a PC, but Linux. I was 100% Linux for about 6 or 7 years. And whilst I do like the Mac, it still annoys me every single day with the keyboard, and the keys are just wrong.
We're talking about a lack of the hash key.
Oh, well, I've got a reprogrammed keyboard for that. Yeah, that was silly. But whilst I use the MacBook, I'm an Android phone user. Don't have an iPhone, thank you very much.
Same here. Same here.
I'm saying nothing. What code editor do you use?
So I've been using one called Epsilon from lugaroo.com for more than 20 years, believe it or not. It's now more than 20 years that I've been using that editor, from before Windows, when it was a DOS program. And I still use it every single day because it's always worked on all platforms. It works in the terminal remotely on my servers, and I don't mean it connects remotely, I mean it actually runs on my servers, so that's great. However, Mac doesn't like it. It still runs under OS X, on X Windows on the Mac, so it's a little bit painful. So recently I've been playing with Sublime Text, which I know is wonderful, but my fingers have been doing the same thing for 20 years, and that's hard. But I've also been playing with PHP Storm as well, which is really impressive when I need a full IDE.
Okay. And how do you manage your code snippets?
Files in my, so I have a folder called Sandbox, which is where all the work happens, and I have a bunch of PHP files in the root of Sandbox. Literally, that's all I do. My editor allows me to search across as many files as I want, and that's where I find stuff. And
how do you? Oh, what do you use? Do you do you develop locally? And what do you use for localhost if you do?
So yeah, absolutely. I do almost everything locally. I use varying vagrants now. Prior to that, I used to use VMware, but when I discovered VVV, I just completely stopped using VMware, even though I still have a license for it. So I do everything in that. I've always used, excuse me, I actually run all my own servers, so I don't do any shared hosting at all. And all my servers run Ubuntu. And in fact my client servers as well when I can persuade them, and so running VVV on an Ubuntu platform is just makes lots and lots of sense. So yeah, that's the one I use.
And what do you use to deploy sites?
So I have a mixture of things. If it's a simple site where maybe there's not actually a huge amount of customization, I will just use rsync. So I don't bother with FTP generally. So I use rsync, which is remote synchronization. Again, because of everything I've got SSH logins too. So I'll just rsync stuff across that way. Some projects I will check out from either Subversion or Git. Now I'm grown up and using Git now, like all the kids do. So I'll use that, and in particular the I'm a Scientist site, because there's a couple of designers work on it as well. Everything there is deployed via Subversion, so the rollbacks are quick and easy. As I say, I've been playing with Git, and recently I've been playing with Ansible, which is like straight over the top of my head, but the people behind Roots.io have built this system called Trellis that puts it all together, and it just works. I've just been playing with that and it seems to work, so I'm very excited by that, because it has nice things where you just on the command line you can deploy to staging and you can deploy to live, and it handles lots of things like different configurations and stuff like that. So very exciting, but I'm still just about dipping my toe in that particular water.
What are your must-use plugins, or what are your favourite plugins that you tend to use on sites?
So Yoast SEO, WP Super Cache. I've been playing with W3TC, is it? The other one. Total Cache, yeah. But I find it too complicated. I'm a very technical person. I've been doing this computer thing since 1978. I wrote my first program, but I find Total Cache, W3 Total Cache, too complicated. Super Cache I use the most, and external caching. I've been playing about with external caching with Nginx and things like that. Other plugins, Limit Logging Attempts used to be my favorite. It's just gone over 2 years old now, which is a bit of a shame, so it's not going to turn up when people search for it. And of course, in those situations where Jetpack is a really good answer for a simple site that just needs a whole bunch of functionality, Jetpack now has that functionality to limit the logins, although I don't like the fact that they had a capture without you having any choice about it. What else do I use? Update notifier is really useful. So I have a folder full of daily emails that tell me what plugins need updating, because I manage kind of between 80 and 150 sites, depending on how many test sites I've got running as well. So yeah, just being able to manage those is great, and update notifiers really useful for that. Yeah, and then others it's more specialized depending on the type of site I'm building.
Okay, and do you use any particular starter theme for Genesis, or?
No, I don't actually. I tend to stick to the simpler ones, but again, because I'm not a designer, so if I've got any choice in the matter, I'll start with the simplest ones, and I can't even think what they're called. Minimum. There's one called Minimum. There's one that has a little parallax front end, so I've used that on a couple of sites. Yeah, just the simplest, nicest looking ones in terms of just font and white space. Simpler the better for me.
I feel kind of embarrassed asking this question, but have you ever written a public plugin?
Yes, but only about 2 months ago.
Oh, really?
Amazingly. So besides the stuff, it was somebody had a specific question about turning off something in 2011. I can't remember, or maybe 2014. So I wrote a plugin for them rather than explain how to do it, and put it on GitHub. It's not gone on the WordPress repository, but it's actually the first plugin I've ever published. I used to publish 3 or 4 themes many years ago that were incredibly popular for quite a while. I still have in excess of 500,000 links to my old blog from sites still using those themes, amazingly. Wow. Rather embarrassingly, they seem to be very popular with amateur porn sites. I have no idea why. I think they were good for SEO. But it's just like, oh, a new site's using it. Oh, no, I don't want to look there. Oh, no. Yeah, really weird. Really weird. Not updating them for years now.
You make sure you have TrackBack switched off for that, I would have thought. Yes.
Yeah, that was odd. That was odd. But yeah, so just the one, and only recently, surprisingly.
Is there anything you would like to see changed with the Genesis framework?
Yes. All the top-level code in functions.php needs to be inside a function that's called from the theme loaded action, whatever it's called. Yeah, stop that top-level code. That is so old, and it means that some things are hard to override. Really hard. You have to jump through lots of loops to override things. So that's the one thing I would change.
Wow.
I would hope they'd have done it in the last big update, but alas not.
Okay. And what would you say are the benefits of using Genesis as a developer?
As I mentioned earlier, just that ability to change things in code. So I very often write a plugin that tweaks the theme, even to add a little bit of extra CSS to suit a particular site. But that's as much because I'm not really making huge design changes.
Okay. And what would you say are the benefits of Genesis for your clients?
I really like the mobile responsiveness out of the box. Of course, now we've got the additional accessibility capability that's really good. I have occasionally played with the additional markup that they add for the semantic web. So I'm quite impressed that some of that's in there, and that there's a nice little plugin that adds a few other bits for that as well. So yeah, I just like that, and they're well maintained, nice and secure. I trust the code, and I like the fact that you can make them do more and make them more complex, but by adding plugins instead of it all being in the theme from the start.
Did you watch Genesis Camp? That was back in July, I think, wasn't it? Yes.
It's on my to-do list. It's on my to-watch list, along with a zillion other videos. I think I might have watched one thing, and I can't remember which one it was now. But yeah, it was one of those where I wish I'd been. I can't remember why I couldn't watch it live, but you're then suddenly faced with overwhelming 6 or 7 hours worth of videos to watch, and it's like just finding the time to do it.
Yeah. Do you think they should run it again next year? I suppose it's difficult to say if you've not seen it.
Yeah, I mean, just the idea of it was great anyway, and I think as the technology is improved enough that you can actually run something like that. I mean, I remember the recent Buddy Camp had people speaking from the other side of the world. Then yeah, I think it's a great way to run conferences that make it easier to manage, still give the value without that overhead of having to for people spending lots of money to get to places and things like that. Of course, you lose the physical interaction, but yeah, I think it's a great way to run a conference.
Yeah, it was quite good fun actually. Yeah. Do you prefer www or non-www domains?
Non-www. Goodness me. Because it's 6 extra syllables, for goodness sake, and just every newsreader and every radio advert that I think you've just lost 3 seconds or 5 seconds saying www. So yeah, turn it off, please.
And what is this last question? What is your preferred tool or plugin for post types and custom fields implementation?
Custom fields, I used advanced custom fields now. I used to write all my own code, and now I rarely write any code for custom fields. I tend to start a project using the custom post type UI, which is the Brad Williams one. I think it's Brad Williams, to define my custom post types. But I love the fact that it will spit out the PHP code for you, because at some point I'll end up putting that into a plugin when I start building the rest of the functionality, and then turn off the plugin and throw it away, as it were. So that's generally what I tend to use.
Excellent. Okay then, we have gone well over our time now, so we'll start to wrap up. Who would you most like to see on this podcast in the future, and how many of our previous podcasts have you watched?
I think I might have watched 2. I was sorry to say. Who would I? Actually, you've already done the person that I would have said, which was Sue Fernandez. So you've already done Sue. I'm not sure, actually. I can't think of anyone off the top of my head. I shall try and think of somebody.
I think it needs to be Gary. I think Paul, who sometimes co-hosts as well, Paul and I need to interview Gary.
I've actually done Gary.
But
right.
He keeps squirming out of it. So I think, hey Twitter, if you think it should be Gary, please let us know.
Yeah. That'd be a good one.
We might have scheduled me in for next year.
Oh, right.
And once we get to our 1-year anniversary, then I have actually scheduled myself in for that on request of others. So, awesome. Okay. Where can we find you online, Mike?
So I am on Twitter, and I do check it occasionally. So it's Mike Little Z1, ZED number 1. And my website is mikelittle.org, and there's a contact form on there that comes through to my email, and those are probably the main ones. Otherwise, if you're in the Manchester area, trot along to Manchester WordPress User Group 3rd Wednesday of the month and come and say hi. We have a great community there, and always welcome new people.
Excellent. Sounds good. Right. Thank you very much for joining us today, Mike. Thank you so much for your time.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you to our listeners as well, and for all your questions during the show and before the show. And thank you to Joe for joining us as well.
Yeah.
Any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
Keep plugging at it. It gets easier. Whether that's using or whether that's developing for WordPress and Genesis. Learn something new every day and help somebody else, because that's a great way to solidify your own learning. There you go.
Sweet. Thank you very much. And on those fantastic words, we will see you in 2 weeks' time, where our guest is Dave Dean, WP Musketeer, and we shall see you all then. Until then, bye-bye.
Cool.